organisations versus the state is blurred to some extent, where corporates take on the role in terms of healthcare, for example. The relationship between employee and the organisation is not just one of employer-employee. There's actually a family-orientated focus. And in the orange world, this fragmented world, where you have small organisations who are nimbly working together, where small organisations or individuals will come together, work on a specific project, and then potentially do something else. So you have this whole concept of having multiple careers within your one career. Now, in that particular model, the primary role of the HR function is going to be to make sure that we get the right people in the right place to do the right project. So it's, in many ways, a recruitment function is the predominant focus. Now, we're not saying that one of these is going to become the predominant model. We're saying that all of these could potentially manifest. What I would say from what I've seen, I think there's probably, if I look at Kuwait specifically, and I'd invite any other views to the contrary on this, I think the predominant model is one towards blue/green, where the corporates are really powerful, but an increasing emphasis on the corporate social responsibility agenda. As I say, my opinion. We'll come back in 10 years' time and see whether I'm right or not. So, given that context, I just wanted to think a little bit more about, so we've talked in fairly generic terms, what's unique about oil and gas. And I think in the presentations we've heard this morning, we've heard some of those points already. But just to re-emphasise one or two of them, I think business complexity within the businesses that you work in is really of paramount importance. So you're managing people who have skills from everything from managing a petrol station to potentially managing oil assets in a trading room. So huge diversity in the way that you reward people, the sorts of careers they have, the sorts of expectations that they have, etc. The second point, which I think is really important, which is linked to that first one, is how do you manage critical skills within that environment? We've talked a little bit earlier, we touched on mobility a little bit earlier on, where above, I think, in my view, any sector, oil and gas, you have to move people around quite frequently. Many of your competitors have set up global employment companies where an individual will work for one particular entity and then potentially move around the world to get the right skills that they need to be successful and to potentially be your leaders in the future. The third point for me, which is a sort of one that I think is often overlooked, is that this is more than just about making the right decisions. This is potentially about life and death, more than any other sector. I've worked extensively in financial services. My last job in the UK was as head of HR for Lehman Brothers, which I'm never quite sure is a good citation or not, but that was my last role. Banks lose huge amounts of money, but I'd argue that people don't die. Within oil and gas, some of the decisions that are made, if they're the wrong decisions, if the workforce isn't engaged, as we heard on the video earlier on, then people can die. So actually, the decisions we make, in my view, are really, really important. I'm going to gloss over this slide to some extent, and we'll happily, I think, share these slides with you at some later stage if you'd like to see them. But what this slide does is just give you a summary of the different worlds, and then if you look at the primary functions within HR, what we think are the primary characteristics within those different worlds. So that's really more as a reference slide for you if you'd like to look back at these slides at some later stage. There is also some documentation that sits behind this presentation which goes into the research in more detail. So if you do want copies, I've brought half a dozen with me. So please take those because it means it's a bit lighter when I fly back to Qatar tonight. But if we run out, then please just let me know and we'll make sure you get some copies. I promise it's actually, for a consulting document, it's actually quite a good read. So it may be a good weekend read. As I say, as long as you're not colourblind. Right. that's sort of the first part, and we could spend days, and we have done, on managing tomorrow's people. So please, if you have questions, either ask me now or ask me at the end. But that's the sort of the first part I really wanted to touch on. The second part is this global CEO survey that we do every year. And as I say, we launched it in Davos last month. And it provides some really interesting insights into what's on the CEO's mind around the world. Now, as you'd imagine, there has been quite a lot of shift of what's on the CEO's mind over the last couple of years. In many cases, there's been a huge amount of firefighting. There's been CEOs really concerned about, if you're in financial services, about liquidity, about risk management, about really trying to keep the businesses afloat. But what's been consistent across financial services, across every single sector, is that talent management still remains high up on the CEO's agenda, even though they've got organisations that are failing. 70% of CEOs saying that they still believe that they haven't got the right talent in the right place to make their organisations successful. Kind of obvious, but let me give you a statistic which always helps. We all know to a greater or lesser extent that things occur, problems occur within organisations. Many of those issues, in my view, have been exacerbated over the last couple of years by individual behaviour. So whether it's driven by reward systems and greed, or whether it's driven by a lack of expertise to deal with something unexpected that's been thrown at an individual, employee behaviour has certainly exacerbated the economic crisis we've seen in the last couple of years. The other thing which CEOs, in my view, are certainly woken up to is that in many organisations, and this is less true, I appreciate, for oil and gas, but in many organisations, the costs of your people are a significant proportion of your overall total costs. As I say, I fully appreciate that when you're in an organisation that has massive investments in infrastructure, that's less true, but people costs are nevertheless a significant proportion of an organisation's typical costs. So I did want to dive into some of the detail of the Global CEO Survey. Again, big survey that sits behind this, a big report. Not as interesting a read as the Managing Tomorrow's People one. If you're falling asleep, the Global CEO Survey has loads of great data, but it's not as a riveting read. So maybe if you can't sleep tonight, then please grab a copy and take a look. But nevertheless, great data. Now, if this has been recorded, I'll be in trouble if this goes back to my PwC bosses. So one of just picked out a few statistics, and there's many more in the report. But one of the statistics I wanted to sort of use to highlight a point was